Okay, today I thought we'd take a look at the insides, how to repair and work on the 1960s Cragstand Friendship Space Capsule. This is the battery operated version, the version that is bump and go and smokes. And one of the main reasons I agreed to repair this toy for a toy dealer was that I actually had this, not this one, but had one of these in the 1960s when I was a kid, and I thought it'd be fun to play with one again. I didn't have just robots. I actually had a few space capsules, spaceships, had the Mark's Mystery flying saucer, or whatever the hell it was called, the big gyro. Anyway, we won't get into what all the ones I had. I had one of these, but before I get into opening and repairing and telling you what's going on, I did remember something different about the one that I had than this. So apparently they made more than one version. My memory on the back side of it, and you'll see this later, there's these thrusters, and this is where the smoke comes out. And on this particular one, these thrusters are more or less a solid color, and it's kind of same type of plastic like milk cartons and bottles would be made out of, very waxy feeling, you know, kind of stuff you can't glue to, probably polyethylene or polypropylene or something like that. I remembered in my memory, which probably is faulty because it's so long ago now, that my tailpiece like this was a translucent red plastic, a hard plastic, much like you'd have in a plastic model kit. And I also remembered that mine lit up. So I was, in trying to find out whether I was just remembering that one detail wrong or not, I went up on the Alphadrome website. Let me kick this camera around here just for a second. And here we are on the Alphadrome website, and I'll zoom in a little bit. As you can see, this is the way I remember the box being and the toy being when it's assembled and everything. And down here, down below in this description things, it says right there, has the astronaut a dashboard with a red flashing light? True, mine did, and this one does also. And then a lighted red plastic engine has been placed on the other end. Capsule bump and go with smoking action. So whoever put up their description of the toy on Alphadrome remembered it the same way that I remembered mine. So there must have been two versions of it. One that had the tail light that lit. Gotta get this camera situated so I'm not tripping over its legs here. Let me try this. Here we go. I think that might work out better for me. So we do have the light that flashes here. Obviously the toy is apart because normally these two halves would be together. There's a hatch on top here where two D cells go in. We're going to look at that and the wiring a little bit more. There's a clear dome piece that goes in the front, and of course the rear thrusters that we just talked about. But on the inner workings, well, and you have a switch here, and some of them the switches were different colors. Green and yellow, I think, being two of the more popular colors. As far as looking at the very bottom of it, you can see the bump and go drive there, and a couple of roller wheels on the back. Here's the smoking unit, the bellows that get pushed by that little lever right there to make the smoke come out. Here's a cam which controls this follower arm, and that follower arm, there's a little, see this cardboard box? There's a metal wiper, see that metal wiper? That follow arm in this cam will allow that wiper to hit against this gear and make a sound. And it'll, because this cam has notches cut in it, that means that it'll go beep beep and then pause, beep beep and then pause. And basically this is the end of the battery motor. The pinion gear is down below, and there are two gearboxes in this toy. This one, as you can see, has this large gear and then goes to this cam. This cam not only works this, but the other end of the cam is what moves this finger in and out to pump the paper bellows to make it smoke. Well, then the bump and go drive gearbox comes off that same motor pinion gear, but you can see it goes to this gear and then goes to a series of gears down below just for the bump and go drive. As far as the motor goes, you might be able to get the camera angle where you can see you can see the bottom motor there, see that little slot? That little slot will provide enough room to spray some contact cleaner in there when the toy is running to clean the brushes on the motor to get it back up to speed. And by fishing through these slots down here, you can get to the very bottom of the motor shaft to lubricate it, and of course here up on top you can get right in there to lubricate that using a precision oiler. Now you can get containers like this in hobby stores and online with the needle nose and attachment, so you can put your favorite type of oil, whether that's 3-in-1 oil or gun oil or sewing machine oil, whatever you like to use, to do precision oiling like that. Here's another one of the type of little bottles that's very common that you can buy online. This particular one I keep filled with smoke fluid, and that's good for recharging the smoking units in these types of toys. Now initially when the toy came to me, the largest problem with it was with this plastic part of the switch, the on-off switch. That was broken and missing, and the person that sent the toy to me repaired sent me a switch unit that had been scavenged from some other toy. The same switch type unit was used in more than one type of toy, and I didn't need all of the parts. There's the metal frame that holds it to the frame of the toy, and then here's the fiber board with the two contacts. And floating around, there it is on the back side of this piece of plastic. There's your one that basically connects the two dots, the two brass contacts to turn it on and off. And the green plastic part, this is one that I measured up off the original part that was in this bag, which is now in this toy, as per the request of the person that wanted me to repair it. I measured up from that and made one and 3D printed one. So if it ever came up again where someone needed that switch, we could in fact just 3D print that plastic part, because that's about the only part that can break in the switch, and keep them going that way. The front dome, which goes obviously out here when the toy is put together, and it's a bump and go toy, so you can imagine that this is going to take a lot of bumping as it gets played with. So it's very common to have these with fracture lines in them. There's not much you can do about that. And what holds them in place is this little slot. You can see this slot here. So you got an outside dome, and this part is about the same height, but then there's a slot on the inside which gets captured by this lip, top and bottom. Well, as you can see, most of that is broken away. So anytime the toy gets hit a lot or crushed a lot or anything, it's very common to find a lot of that broken away. There isn't a whole lot left to hold this dome in place. One request by the person that asked me to fix this was that there was a very dark spot. It was much darker than it is now, but you can see this spot right here in the center. It's not on the outside, it's on the inside. And let's see if the microphone picks this up. When I move my finger in any part of the dome, you don't hear anything. But when I move my finger over where that dark spot is, you can hear it. So that tells you that that part in there is actually rough. It's etched. It's had some sort of chemical reaction happen to it. It wasn't just a matter of dirt. I did remove what dirt I could and polished it away. But if you were trying to make this dome perfect, you would actually have to spend, probably a whole day, 8-10 hours. And the process for making clear plastic parts clear again is you start with whatever grit sandpaper it takes to remove the rough part, the problem area, which is going to scuff the whole thing. So now you've got a milk bone translucent dome instead of clear. And then you keep going to lighter and lighter and lighter, you know, 600 grit, 800 grit, 1000 grit, 1200. And then you get into where you start using your different polishes and working them with soft cloths and cleaning them. And when you're all done, then you can go in there with your cleaner, your plastic clean and shine. So I did use both those two polishes on it for a while, and the clean and shine, to get it to this point, which is much better than it was. I don't normally do windows, you know, I repair toys, so I'm not willing to spend the day or the time that it takes to make this dome look new again, especially when it already has other visible fractures and very little material left to hold it in place. When I do put this toy back together, and I'll do another video of this toy actually together and running, and I'll link it in the bottom description of this video, so if you're watching on YouTube you can find that link and see how it works. But I'll probably leave what's left of the working parts that hold it in place mostly on the upper part up here. Let's see, I haven't even tried fitting it in there. Let's try that before I make the statement. Yeah, I think that might still work. There we go. Yep, that would still fit. And then on the very bottom part where it's less visible underneath the control console, I might put a little bit of E6000 goop glue, because that's non-permanent, but it won't let go on its own. Doesn't damage the toy, it can always be removed, just to hold the bottom part of the dome in place. Okay, now other problems after I fixed the switch. One of the and it isn't really a problem, it's just the way the toys were designed. I guess I should reword it that way. They always try to use the metal frame of the toy as one of the, let's call it common ground in this case. It does happen to be the negative side of the battery. Let's just call it common ground. So you've got a lot of connections that are just based on metal, touching metal, 6, 7 times in a row, these contact points, and the metal is almost always painted. So you're kind of lucky that it ever works at all. But for example, this shiny back part here on the battery holder, it contains, let's get that back in frame better, a spring, you know, a coiled spring that the negative side of the battery is going to push against as it goes in place. And that spring is simply touching this shiny colored piece of metal. They're not soldered, they're not welded. It's just a contact on contact. So a springy, usually it's a bronze or brass colored coil, but not always, just depends. And then this shiny piece of metal is held on with just 2 metal tabs to this gray painted piece of metal, and then this gray painted piece of metal is held onto this frame piece here by 6 metal tabs. So you see the power's got to go from that coil, which is just touching this, and this is just touching this, and this is just touching this, all through painted surfaces. Then this whole piece just touches the main body of the toy through these 6 tabs, and then this main part of the body attaches to this gearbox, which is held in place by 5 tabs. So this is just touching this, and that will get the common ground, if you will, to the motor, because the motor does have a wire from it which is soldered to this shiny part of the frame here. In fact, the wire is right over down in here, and we may see it later when I get the thing running in front of the camera and show it to you better. Let's change this camera angle a little bit. There we go. So that gets your ground to that part of it. Now, to get this light on the front up here on the dash that we talked about to blink, what they've done is they put a piece of metal on the back, right back here, on the back of the bellows. So every time this arm, which is going to go in and out and in and out, every time this arm touches that piece of metal to push on the bellows, that also provides ground from this motor mount because the bellows are made out of cardboard and paper, so they're insulated. Provides a ground feed, and then there's this red wire, which is one of the light wires. It goes all the way up to that little light in the front, and the other side of the light wire just goes to the battery B+. So every time that touches, that's going to make the light in the front turn on and off and on and off. Every time it pushes smoke, the light will come on. So that's their light flasher circuit. What else? If you ever happen to have to open a toy like this that are tabbed and the tabs are on the inside, basically you'll notice that these tabs fit into little slots right there, and those little slots have holes right below them, and once they're put together, you go back around with something that's like tool steel, like the end of a very small drill bit would work well, or the end of a small Allen wrench or hex wrench, whichever term you like to use, and that allows you to bend that tab up from the outside by applying pressure out here. Oop, got my battery doors opening up because there we go. So if you have to take something like this apart, it can be very tricky. You want to start, in the case of the capsule, by taking this end piece off, which tabs in a couple places here and here, and those tabs aren't bent. They just go straight in, and then the bottom tabs actually have these little cutaways. So if you make yourself a small tool, you can hook the metal tabs, bend that. Once you get the bottom two free, you can remove this. Once this is removed, you can then go in with a long flat blade screwdriver, and you can reach, like where that first one, that tab's going to be bent up, so you reach up above and bend that tab down. And if you've got a long enough one, you can usually get up to this one as well and do that. And if you do that on both sides, you've now got most of the body freed up. You will have to come along with a small screwdriver and do a little bit of prying to loosen these two up at this angle, and then again on the other side. Then you'll get the shells apart. If you do end up bending the metal, you can straighten that back out once you have the toy apart. And so that's the gist of how to get in there and how to make them work. Now, when I just went through that long dissertation of telling you how the ground has to go through like 6 different just metal touching metal places before it can get to the motor, or even to the smoker, because the smoker has a common ground, and the smoker's held into this frame by 3 little metal tabs as well. So if you really want to make the toys work better, you want to assure that that ground is good, I'll generally go in and I'll add, in this case, 2 wires, which could always be removed if it bothered somebody, if they didn't like something added. But I added this black wire, which there you can see it, and right here on this silver end, just soldered it to this shiny metal end here, and bring it all the way up and soldered it right onto the frame, right where the motor's ground wire solders on. So now I know I've got a good ground connection from my battery directly to the motor frame. In the case of the smoker, I add this black wire right here, right from the smoker directly up to the frame. So I know the smoker and I know the motor can both get full ground power. They're not going to be losing it through any of the old painted metal on metal connections. The positive ones already go through the switch, so you're already assured that your positive connection should be in good shape. You also notice on the factory, this has got some cellophane, clear like tape on it on this backside. I didn't put that there. That's factory. I've seen it in these toys every time, and that's because the back of this battery pack, when everything's assembled, comes right to the back, comes right down here basically. And they didn't want the back of the battery pack touching the back of the bellows and maybe not allowing that light to blink on and off. Now the front of the battery pack, how do I turn this so you can see it? Right there where the positive wire is, that when this whole thing is put together is actually going to touch on the metal. You can see right here where it's already worn through. That's this bottom edge So it's possible that, there we go, it's possible that where the red wire is soldered on, I just happened to pass the black wire right past the red just so I knew where it was. But normally there's just that red wire there. You want to make sure that that contact can't possibly, by accident even, touch here, because this is ground, and that would short out the whole pack and cause a problem. Now the one thing that's in your favor is that this whole thing's at an angle, as you can see. I almost need to get further away. The battery pack's at an angle and the front's this way, so that means that the bottom edge of that pack, this edge here, is what's going to rub first normally, and not the positive. If you were really fearful of that becoming a problem, you could put some tape right over where the positive part is. In my case, I put a little E6000 over that just to make sure that it doesn't ever short against that part of the frame. Okay, now I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to move this camera back a little bit more. The best way to hold this thing, but I'm going to turn this on, I think. So now you can see how that squeaker is sequenced. You can see how that works that. And you can see how it's puffing out the smoke like crazy. Now initially, of course, it wasn't smoking at all. And that was one of the things that was requested by the owner of this toy, was that I recharge the smoking unit. Now the smoking unit is held in with a little metal bracket, and it does have its two wires on either side on there. So I desoldered those wires, got the smoker unit up out of the bracket, and on the very bottom side of this smoker unit, this whole smoker unit is just made out of styrene plastic, like a plastic model kit. On the very bottom of this particular style of smoker unit, you'll either find that there was a small holder where they, in the original toy, they just put light grade oil in. These days we use, regular, like Lionel trained smoking fluid for heater type units. And there was a small hole there, and they'll either plug it and glue it, or they just took a soldering gun and melted all the plastic together in a big blob to seal it, to keep the oil inside the unit. Inside this lower chamber there's a wick, just like a candle would have, or like an oil lamp would have, and the wick comes up and passes through a small hole up to where the heater is up here on the very top. So I pulled it out. This particular one had the plug which had been glued. I went around with the X-Acto knife, was able to break the glue loose, pulled the plug out, then went back in it using my little device here and put a whole bunch of smoking fluid up inside there, hoping that the wick might eventually start grabbing again, because the wick was very caramelized. The old oil had dried and left it very sticky, thicky. It wasn't the kind of thing that was really going to wick all that well. But I put a lot of the fluid in there, resealed it with the plastic plug and glued it. And then I also came into the top through one of these holes, and using the needle unit that I talked about, put a little bit of smoke fluid right in here on the top of the wick, basically. And initially they take a while if you put too much fluid in there, the heating element stays too cold and it doesn't smoke because it's flooded out. So you do have to let that soak into the wick, kind of work its way down, and then it'll start smoking like crazy again, just like it is now. This is one of my favorite smoker designs. When I was a kid and I had a lot of different toys that smoked from the, there's just a lot of different toys that smoked. These units seem to always work just about the best of any of them. They really could kick out the smoke and only draw about the same amount of power as the motor. They do draw quite a bit, like 220 milliamps or so. But that's kind of standard on these toys. I mean, if you had a light bulb that was in there, you knew you were going to be drawing 150 to 200 milliamps. You knew the motor was going to draw 150 to 250 milliamps, depending on how badly loaded it is and that kind of thing. So it all adds up. And back then you only had carbon batteries, so they didn't last that long. One more thing on the squeaker unit before we get too far away is the cardboard box is very common to try to amplify the sound of the buzzer, squeaker, whatever you would like to call it. And you can see here how the cardboard is deformed in, and that happens over time and moisture, and that's because there's pressure on this finger to want to touch this. And let me see if I can turn this. There. So now the finger is actually touching it. You can hear it. What happens is when that cardboard finally, through the years, gives way and warps, then there isn't enough pressure on this finger to push on here to produce sound anymore. So if you do have one of these toys where everything's there but it's still not squeaking, you're going to have to go back in and add a little bit more of a bend to this metal finger wiper so that it has enough pressure to push against that. Now that isn't going to stop the cardboard from warping again more over time. I suppose a person could go in there and put a little bit of, you know, E6000 little goop glue or something between it and this metal so that it won't continue to warp in further and lose its pressure. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave all this stuff as stock as possible. It's working now that I've added a little bit more of a bend to it. Here you can kind of see how that cam is going to work to move that finger to and from the squeaking unit as it comes around. Okay, I think I've just about covered everything I wanted to cover on the inside of this, how they worked, what I like to do to repair them, how to get them apart. Like I say, the next video should be this thing assembled on the floor, bumping and going. So I'll link that down below, and hope you enjoyed this recap or look at, in case you weren't familiar with this toy. Like I say, this was special for me because I actually had one of these when I was a kid, and I guess I loved tearing it apart more than I did playing with it as a spaceship because of the smoking, because of the beeping, because of the flashing light. Again, like I say, I remember mine the way this one is written, that this red tailpiece part, which was the translucent red on mine, lit up, which actually made it easier to see the smoking effect. It would have shortened the battery life though, because you would have had one more light in the case of the tailpiece on all the time. But these were very small green or wheat type bulbs, very small bulbs. I don't think these drew all that much. I think maybe 60 milliamps or so. They weren't as much as like a flashlight bulb, which is in most of the toys that had lights. So it probably didn't make too much of a difference on how long the battery power lasted. So there you have it. It's your Cragstan's Space Capsule, the Friendship Space Capsule. And it's a very cool toy.